So there was a woman who saw our video that's all about free camping in the quartzite desert, and she left a comment and we began to chat a little bit, and I asked her if she had any questions or if she had any issues that we might be able to help her with, and asked her if she had suggestions for Pete and I to do some more future videos and some content that might be interesting to her. And she said yes, actually. She said that she lives in Florida and she is going to be retiring, and she wondered about traveling in the desert as a solo female camper, and wondered especially about the washes and just what it's like to travel in the state and how to stay safe when she's moving around here. So I said, you know what? We've been living here for a really long time. Yes, we can help. So Pete and I have been traveling in an RV all across the state. We do a lot of boondocking throughout Arizona's deserts, and we've also lived in the desert for a really long time. So we have experience, a lot of experience. And so I'm standing here today, and I am actually in a wash. There's a little bit of water. We've had some rain earlier today. It's not real high, but you can see how the terrain here is lower than the terrain that is behind me where all the RVs are. So when I first moved to Arizona, I lived in an apartment complex, and when you would drive into the complex, there was a sign on the side of the road that said, don't cross when flooded. I thought it was a joke, and it was no joke. After I experienced my first monsoon storm, I realized it wasn't a joke, and the storms can be really dangerous, and the washes have the potential to be super dangerous too. So I wanted to share some tips about traveling around in the desert, especially when you've got an RV that you are living in or towing behind you. Try to keep you safe and have a really good time while you're out here in the desert. So washes are basically kind of like almost like dry stream beds that will fill up in a rain. And what happens is the desert ground is so hard and it's not absorbent. So when it rains, a lot of times the rain won't actually soak into the ground. And our desert storms are very intense, they're fast, and they're very centralized. They're like kind of very localized. And so they'll dump a lot of rain in a very short period of time. And what that means is when the water has nowhere to go because it can't sink into that hard ground, it just starts to flow, and it will begin to puddle at the lowest natural point in the landscape. And so that's what you're seeing right behind me here today. The soil that you'll find in most washes usually is like sand and gravel and clay. And what you need to know is it's either going to be really like hard and compact, or it's going to be really sandy and it's going to be hard to drive through, and you'll have the potential to easily sink into it. So there's going to be some clues about what you should be looking for when you're driving around in the desert that I want to share with you. So before you decide that you want to camp around a wash, you first need to know what you are looking for to know if you're in an area with a wash. Let me say this, I'm going to say this several times. You never want to camp in a wash. You can camp near a wash, next to a wash, but you don't want to camp in a wash. When you are towing an RV, the only thing you want to do with a wash is cross it, and that's only if it's dry and safe. But the things that you're going to be looking for to know if you're in a wash is you're going to begin to see some deep places in the landscape, and you're going to kind of see like walls that are built up, and you're going to notice that the water has a place to kind of flow into those little kind of nooks and crannies, and it will begin as the water flows more and it starts to push its way through the desert. It will begin to kind of meander. The one thing that you can look for from a really high elevation is you will see green in the midst of a whole lot of brown. And that's because you will see desert trees. We have a lot of Palo Verde and we have a lot of mesquite in the Sonoran Desert. And those are the big bushes and trees that you'll see that cause the desert floor to look very green. When you start to see strings of green, you know that's a wash. The other thing that you'll notice is that you'll see a lot of gravel and you'll see a lot of big rocks that are rounded. And that's because when the water flows and the rocks tumble, they begin to get smooth and they get rounded. Another big sign that you're in a wash is that you will see dirt that looks like mud that has dried out and then cracked. That is a sure sign that you're in a wash, because that means that water was there and then it dissipated in some way, and then it cracked because it's dry and arid most of the time when we're here. And so that's a sign that there has been water that has been flooded in that area. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that running water, or signs of running water, is also signs of a wash. So when the wash gets really flowing, it starts to pick up debris as it flows. And so you'll begin to see on the sides of the banks of the wash, you will see things like big tree limbs, you'll see garbage, you'll see rocks, you'll see a bunch of kind of like debris. And that's definitely a sign that there's been water in the area. And if there's been flooding water in the area before, it will likely come again. So those are the things that you will put up your warning flags to say, hey, that's a wash. Now what do I need to do? Now you know you need to avoid camping in it, number one. And number two is the only thing that we recommend for RVers to do with a wash is to either turn around and avoid it completely, or to cross over a dry wash bed to get to higher ground where you might want to RV camp in an area that is a little higher elevation beyond the wash. So not all washes are created equal. So some washes have a lot of sand and it is deep sand. Here in this wash, we're a lot rockier than what you might find in other areas. So this one isn't going to be as treacherous to cross if it's got some, if it's been wet and it's still a little bit moist and you need to cross the area. This will be easier and it will dry out quicker than areas with sand where you can actually begin to dig in, and your tires will dig in. The one thing you definitely don't want to do when you're in that situation is you don't want to start spinning your tires, because when you do that, you start digging yourself in, and that is a sure sign that you're probably going to be calling for a very expensive tow truck to try to get you out of that situation. If you're approaching a wash, one thing that you want to do is we always are in four-wheel drive, because you never know for sure what you're going to come into. So it might be a sandy area where you kind of feel like you start fishtailing a little bit, you start sinking a little bit. You want to keep your speed up, not super fast, but you don't want to stop in that because you'll begin to sink. You want to maintain a nice, steady, even pace, getting yourself out and getting through it, and you'll eventually get to higher ground. And that is a good time to already be in four-wheel drive. So you're proactive in that. If you don't have a vehicle that's always in four-wheel drive, like ours, we have the selection 2-wheel or 4-wheel. So when we know that we're coming in an area like that, we're automatically going to go into four-wheel drive before we get there, so that we don't get in a situation where we're starting to have some trouble and go, dang, wish we were in four-wheel drive. Because at that point, it's almost impossible to stop, switch it over, and get going and not be in trouble. You want to keep moving once you start to get into that sandy stuff. Where does all the water come from when you're in the desert? Well, there's a couple of places. It's either coming from some kind of a storm, and that's usually something in higher elevations, like in some kind of mountainous terrain, where it starts to travel down hills, down mountains, and into kind of like valleys. And the other thing is, if you're in an area that has mountains that actually get snow, that water can actually be caused by snowmelt coming down instead of rain coming down. So if you're camping in an area and all of a sudden you're on the other side of the wash and you need to get out, so you've got to think, how am I going to get out if this thing is flooded, right? So there's not a whole lot that you can do except wait it out. So eventually we're in the desert, it's going to dry out again. So usually it will evaporate. and a little bit will actually soak into the ground, and over time it will basically get dry again. If it's a lot more water than that, then it will usually keep on flowing, and it will flow to even lower ground and into streams. It might even eventually get into like the Colorado River, for example, or the Verde Valley River that we have around here. So it's it's going to keep moving, and it's going to keep slowly sinking into the soil, and it will continue to slowly evaporate, and eventually it will get dry again. But the question is it really dry enough for you to safely drive over and get out and not get stuck? If it's flowing, I have seen so many videos on local TV where rescue crews are going in with helicopters and like they're pulling people out from their vehicles that are stuck in the middle of a wash, and the water is rising, and they're standing on top of their vehicles and they have nowhere to go. The water is rushing so fast. So whatever you do, don't cross it when it's flooded. If you are in a situation where you're waiting for it to subside and you want to get out, then you want to test the ground to make sure that it's safe for you to drive over it. So you can there's like 4 different tests that you can do to kind of see if it's ready for you to actually drive over and it's safe for you to drive over it to get out. So the first test that you can do is just a visual inspection. Take a look around at the ground and see what it looks like. Does it look wet? Does it look dry? Does it look firm? Does it look rocky or sandy? If it's sandy, it's going to need to dry out more because you're going to be more likely to sink into it. And does it have dried up mud that's got the cracks in it? And if so, take a look at that and also feel that, because if the top layer is dry, that doesn't mean that it's really dry much below that. So you kind of want to take a little bit of a shovel or something to kind of pick your way down a little bit to see, is it really solid far enough down where once you start driving, you're not going to sink into it. You do not want to begin driving unless you're sure that it's going to be able to handle the weight of your vehicle. The second test is the foot test. Walk on it. Walk on it and see how it feels. Does it feel like it's holding you up? Does it feel like your foot is actually beginning to sink? Does it feel spongy? If it feels spongy, it's not completely dried out yet. So that's the second test. So notice that the first 2 tests have nothing to do with your vehicle. We don't want to get into your vehicle yet until we pass these other tests first. This is a really good example of what somebody driving through a wash is going to do. All right, so you can see exactly how deep that water was as that guy drives through. So that's kind of cool to see that and know. Now we're on to our test number 3, and that is the stick test. If you have any kind of a stick, like a tent pole or any kind of a stick, you want to stick it into the ground. If it easily sticks into the ground, this is kind of like testing a cake with a toothpick. If you stick it into the ground, it goes in easy, comes out easy, and it's all gooey, it's not done yet. So we're the same thing with this. Now, if you try to stick it in and it's hard and it's really hard to actually push the stick into the ground, most likely we're getting closer to saying, okay, we're ready to try to drive over it. And that's our test number 4. We're actually going to start to drive over it. Now, we recommend do not take your tow vehicle the first time you're testing something where you're unsure about it. Take your truck first if you've got a towable RV. If you've got an A-class or a C-class, that's a totally different story. If you've got a towed, take your towed through there. But you want to use the first attempt over, make it as easy as possible with as light a vehicle as possible for your first test. And then if it passes that test and it felt good, then go back and hook up, get your vehicle, and tow your rig out. But what you want to do first is start driving and go. You can go a little bit. If it feels good and it feels safe to stop, like you're not sinking, go ahead and stop, get out, look at it, see what the tire track looks like. So you can see how far the tire is actually going into the ground. If it's just like leaving a tire mark on top and it's not sinking in, then you're in good shape. If you're starting to sink already without having the heavy weight of your trailer behind you, then you know you might need to wait a little bit longer for that to dry out. Some people want to know if you can actually drive in desert washes. So I'm going to repeat what I had said earlier, which is that we do not recommend driving in a wash with a recreational vehicle. We recommend only crossing a dry wash in order to get somewhere else. We do not recommend actually driving down the wash. That is for ATVers if they're even approved, and if it's legal to do that. There are a lot of people that actually like to drive on motorcycles and ATVs and stuff like that along wash beds. That's fine, but don't take an RV down there. The other thing that you'll find, because when washes carry so much stuff with them, you know who else you'll see out there are people on foot that have metal detectors, because things get unearthed as the water starts to pick stuff up from one place and put it in another place. And people have found lots of, actually, bullets are real common to find around here, but there's some other little trinkets. If you are into metal detecting, it might be kind of a cool thing, but make sure that you're not on somebody's claim. And if you need to get some kind of a permit, make sure that you get that before you go start metal detecting and try to take anything out with you. If you see someone else that is driving ahead of you, make sure that you use them as a guinea pig and watch how did their vehicle perform, and did anything happen that you need to be aware of and maybe avoid the area, or did they get through relatively easily? The water wasn't real deep, it was basically a little puddle, and they can sail on through. So take your cues from other drivers that are in the area. I'll mention just a few safety tips about traveling through wash areas. Number one is always check your weather reports before you go anywhere. You can avoid a whole lot of problems if you know that there is going to be rain on the day that you're supposed to leave. So instead of leaving that day, you pack up and leave the day before. There have been situations where we actually had to wait a couple of days because the rain came and it was unsafe to leave. And so we kind of got stuck there and we waited it out, and that's a safe thing to do. So like I said before, it's gonna dry out. It's the desert. Don't worry about it, but just make sure that you plan and you have the ability and the flexibility in your schedule to be able to do that. You also want to scout a wash before you actually try to drive through a wash. We are always scouting areas that are unfamiliar to us before we go boondocking, and we're doing it with just our truck without our trailer in tow. If you have the ability to do that, you want to do that. If not, pull off to the side of the road and unhook, and then get into just your tow vehicle and make it through that wash. Check how things are going before you actually try to pull your rig through. Some special gear that you want to make sure that you have on board when you're traveling in these kinds of areas is a shovel. That will go a long way if you start to get into trouble. And the other thing that you should have are traction boards. Traction boards are really great for sandy or muddy conditions where you need to get some traction. The ground is just too wet, too sinky, too slippery, too whatever. So they're used a lot in situations like this. They're also used a lot when people go camping on sandy beaches. It's also a really good idea to travel in pairs if you can, because if one vehicle gets stuck and another vehicle is still safe, that other vehicle can try to help pull out with a tow strap or chains the first vehicle, or go get help if need be, because a lot of times you're in a situation where you just don't have any kind of cell service. We carry our phones with us, of course, all the time. We don't want to have to set up our Starlink just to be able to try to call somebody if we get into trouble when we're just traveling somewhere and we're not really set up. So what we also have is a Garmin InReach, and that has the ability to make emergency calls out and send signals out in areas where you have no cell service. So that's a really good option, because you can actually say what your problem is and what kind of help you need when you send that signal out. But remember, you're going to get a bill. So we want to try to avoid, because those bills are really expensive if you need emergency help to try to get you out, your rig out, whatever it is. Those things cost a fortune. So you want to avoid that at all costs. And what a headache, right? Who wants to even deal with that stuff? The last thing I want to mention here is that you want to have an emergency exit. You want to know if something happens, how are you going to get out? If this is your only in and out path, then you know that this is it. Don't don't think that you're going to be able to turn around and go out another direction, because oftentimes there is only one in and out. Just like the same thing with a national forest. If you're in a national forest where a forest fire starts, you need to know how you're going to get out of there. And if it's a one in, one out, and the fire is between you and the path out, you're in trouble. So just be aware of your surroundings and don't get caught off guard. So let's say you did everything right, and all of a sudden this storm came out of nowhere and you are stuck and you're in a flash flood situation. What do you do? First, we'll talk about if you're driving, and second, if you're stationary. If you're in transit, if you are driving, what you absolutely don't want to do is cross the running water wash. If you have to back your way out because there's not enough room to turn around, you need to do that. You do not want to cross that wash. If you're stationary and the water starts flowing, then you're just going to hunker down. What you're going to do is get as far away from the wash area where it's flooding and the water is rising. You're going to go to as high a ground as possible, and you're going to get into a safe situation. Hopefully you parked your rig in a place where it's going to be safe from a situation like that. If not, if you need to move your rig to higher ground, then do that. Also, you want to have the ability to call for emergency services if the situation gets so bad that you really need help just getting out to save your life. So as I'm sitting here talking to you, I don't know, the background looks pretty nice, but I'm going to swing around here in a second and show you the clouds that are building behind us right now. They are building, and that's the next thing that I want to talk about, is the signs that you need to be aware of when water might be coming your way in the form of a flash flood. So number one, you're going to be looking for clouds that are building in the distance. It's the fact that we have almost clear blue sky behind us doesn't mean anything, because there are clouds that are building off in the distance this direction, and the distance that the water can flow from a flash flood is very great. So because the clouds are off in the distance, don't let your guard down and don't automatically feel safe. Know that that could have an impact on you all the way over here. You're also looking for a change in winds and temperatures. If you begin to see a wind or temperature change, it's likely because there is a weather change coming, and oftentimes that is a storm. The third thing that I will say here is that if you've ever seen people that have been interviewed where they were stuck in a flash flood, one of the common things that you hear people say is they heard it before they saw it. The rush of that water is so loud, and especially when you're in places where there are canyons and caverns and things like that and big mountains. This is really common in places like Zion National Park, a lot of the slot canyons in Moab. Those places are notorious for people going out for a hike in the morning on a really bright sunny day, and all of a sudden they're stuck in the middle of a flash flood. They had no idea that it was coming, but they heard it when it started coming, and as it funnels down the canyon and gets faster and faster and faster, it gets loud. It's roaring. When you put all of that stuff together and you look around and you see water-stained rocks and debris that is the evidence of past water floods, you're on high alert and you might have to take some action to protect yourself and be safe. I heard the thunder. Did you hear the thunder? That's one of those audible clues. So in addition to flash floods and washes, there are a couple of other things that I wanted to mention about traveling in the desert. One is, like, the golden rule is don't be afraid to turn around no matter what. You can get yourself into a situation that if you just keep going, even though like your gut is telling you like I probably shouldn't be here, don't keep going. Don't be afraid to turn around, whatever way, even if it's backing yourself out, you just get out of the situation. In addition to regular storms and regular monsoons, we have this weird thing here in the Valley of the Sun, and it is a storm that's called a haboob, and it is a very fierce wind and sand storm. It's sand dust storm. It is basically a wall of sand that goes walking through the desert. You can see it like from miles and miles away. It'll be clear on one side and almost like completely like no visibility on the other side. When you're in the middle of one of those things, you need to hunker down and you need to stay safe. Those can come out quickly, and but they usually move pretty quickly too. So it's going to be not a real long time before it passes. So just stay in one position, stay safe, let it pass, and then move along. The other thing you want to know is that we have lots of mountains in Arizona. That's why we can be at 115 degrees down in the valley, drive for 2 hours up the hill, and be in 70-degree weather in the middle of the summer. It's a beautiful thing. I love living here. We have, seriously, 12-month, year-round awesome camping where you have mild temperatures and it's super, super pleasant. One thing that you do need to know about those mountains, though, is that they can be challenging when you are towing a vehicle. We have one of the steepest grades in the country here in this state. Actually, I think we have more than one. But be ready for steep grades and also be ready for tight turns. So if you have a vehicle that has a big turning radius, you need to be aware of your paths. If you're traveling in an RV, it's a really good idea to take the truck routes because those truck routes are approved for big rigs and you pretty much are safe no matter what. Once you get on the, off the beaten path and you get into those cute little towns and stuff like that, we don't have too many like low-hanging bridges, but we definitely have roads that can be really tight for tight turns and steep grades. So this all kind of sounds really scary, and I don't want to discourage you from camping in the desert because we have some of the most beautiful and free or super cheap camping that is like available in the entire United States. So do come to Arizona, do enjoy our beautiful desert, but just do it with some knowledge and some common sense, and you will be absolutely fine. If you want to check out that video on the free camping in Quartzsite, I will leave a link for that in the description below. Another one of our favorite places to camp for free in the desert is going to Kofa National Wildlife Refuge. We've done a video on that. I'll leave a link for that video in the description below as well. And a little higher elevation, we've got some awesome camping around the Sedona, Arizona area. It is national forest land. It's completely free for 14 days to camp there. One of our visits there, we actually had a hot air balloon land at our campsite. It was one of the most amazing experiences we've had while we were boondocking. I'll leave a link for that video too. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment because just like Chanel, I would absolutely love to help you if you've got any specific questions that you need help with, because we love sharing our knowledge and encouraging other people to come and camp and have a great time. So if you have any questions, leave a comment below and we'll talk to you again soon.